In the far north, where the wind howled like wolves mourning beneath the moon, and the sky hung low and pale over the black shoulders of the fjords, the long dark had returned. Frost clung to the bones of the world, icing the spruce needles and scarring the flat stones with delicate runes of cold. The sun, when it showed, was a bruised smear on the horizon, more ghost than fire. Here, in the village of Eldervac, hidden between two jagged cliffs and the still water of a deep inlet, the people had grown quiet as the season closed its grip. Smoke curled low from their turf-roofed longhouses, sluggish and sullen, as though even fire grew weary in the face of such winter. It was said by the old ones that this time of year was not meant for waking, and those who wandered past nightfall might not find their way back to the warmth of their hearth. The cold entered every crevice of the earth, crept through the cracks in the timber walls, and settled in the joints of the old. Yet inside the longhouse of Halder the Stoneborn, the night air had no dominion. The fire burned slow but steady in the central pit, its glow caught on the smoke-darkened beams above. Shadows danced in long, looping arcs, as if remembering the circle of warriors that once feasted and fought here. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin, cured hides, and the tang of iron. Halder himself, ancient and broad-backed, sat in silence upon the high seat, his breath like fog in the cold air. Around him lay his bloodline, sons and daughters curled on fur-draped platforms, their limbs entwined in the warmth of kinship. They slept not as the restless do, but as if cradled by the mountain itself, dreamless, deep, untouched by the sickness of modern wakefulness. It was no accident, this sleep. Each night, before the fire was allowed to die, the house-mother Brynhild would burn the roots of the dromaspa tree, found only on the wind-scoured slopes of the Roikrafjall. The roots hissed and curled in the coals, releasing a thin, colorless vapor that twisted through the rafters like a serpent of mist. Its scent was neither sweet nor foul but old, older than the gods, some whispered. It quieted the mind and stilled the heart, warding off the stirrings that plagued lesser men, the twitch of thought, the bite of worry, the dreams that fed on sorrow. With the dromaspa in their lungs, the people of Eldervac slept like stones beneath snow. Beyond the door, the village lay sunken in silence. No dogs barked. No infants cried. The snow that blanketed the world muffled all noise until even the sea seemed to hold its breath. The sentry on the palisade wall stood still as a carved post, ice lacing the fur around his hood, eyes open but unseeing, lost in trance. They took turns guarding not from raiders or beasts, but from things that drifted between the veil of sleep and waking. For in Eldervac it was known, though rarely spoken, that sleep was not merely the absence of waking, but a realm all its own, where old things walked. Once, long ago, before even Halda's father was born, a war band had come in the dark of winter, seeking to raid. They had found the gates open, the fires cold, the villagers strewn across their homes in a slumber so deep they might have been corpses. The warriors pillaged in silence, taking food, blades, and gold. But not a soul stirred. Then the warband disappeared, every one of them. Their horses were found days later, returned to the foot of the mountains, wild-eyed and trembling, their saddles empty. Not a single man was ever seen again. Since then, the village did not lock its gates. It let the cold in. For it was not steel or stone that protected Eldervac in the night, but sleep itself. A murmur stirred the stillness inside Halda's hall. It came not from the mouths of the sleeping, but from the shadows above the hearth. The smoke, catching in unseen eddies, coiled into strange shapes, a hunched form, a yawning maw, a pair of glimmering eyes without a face. Halda's own gaze rose to meet it. He did not speak, nor flinch. He had seen it before, many winters past, when the snows were red with plague and the children had stopped dreaming. The shape whispered, though it used no words, only the hush of leaves not present, the hum of insects long dead. It beckoned, and Halda, heavy with the weight of years, bowed his head. He was the keeper, after all, and the first among them to sleep each night and the last to rise. When the shape faded, folding into the smoke as seamlessly as breath into wind, Halda rose. His steps were slow, deliberate. He crossed the hall, past the sleeping forms of his kin, and opened the door to the night. The cold clutched at him, biting through wool and hide. Frost glittered on every surface, catching the moonlight like shards of silver. Above, the stars spun slow and solemn, their light unmarred by flame or forge. The fjord, visible in a narrow break between the cliffs, lay black and still, a mirror for the sky. Halden knelt in the snow, drawing with gloved fingers the sign of air, the rune of mercy and rest. He whispered no prayer. He did not need to. The land remembered. The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of stone and brine and something fainter, a sweetness that did not belong in the world of the waking. Behind him, the door remained open. The warmth from within did not spill outward. Instead, it seemed to draw the cold in, as if the house fed upon the night. He stood again only when the stars had turned, and the shape had passed across the face of the moon. It moved like smoke upon the sky, barely seen yet vast. With slow, trudging steps, Halder returned to the hall and closed the door behind him. The fire had not faltered. The roots still smoldered. He lay down upon the stone bed carved for the elders, wrapped in the fur of a white bear, and let the sleep take him. Not all men feared the cold. Some knew its embrace was older than death. And so the night passed, as they always had in Eldervac, in silence, under frost, watched by old things in the smoke. While the world beyond spun faster, louder, and more restless, here time sank deep, thick and still. And in that stillness, they slept better than kings. The longhouse of Snorri Colli groaned under the weight of ice as if burdened by the age of memory itself. Its beams, blackened from generations of smoke, creaked in the wind that whispered through the eaves like the breath of forgotten ancestors. Snow fell soundlessly, thick and implacable, blanketing the world outside in a hush that seemed less like silence and more like a warning. Inside, the hearth was low, casting red light over rough-cut timbers and fur-lined bedding. The fire's shadows sprawled long and restless on the walls, twitching as if uneasy with what they knew. The air was warm but heavy, soaked in the scent of rendered fat, wet wool, old pine ash, and something deeper, something like soil from the barrows, like the dust from beneath the barrow doors. Here, in this room thick with slumber, a child stirred. Her name was Freydis, daughter of Snorri, barely 9 winters old, and born beneath a blood moon. Her skin was pale as the belly of a trout, and her hair the color of raven's wings in deep fog. That night she lay not in the comfort of furs, but upon the cold stone beside the hearth, unmoving, eyes wide and reflecting the firelight like still water. Her breath was shallow, her limbs stiff, yet she did not sleep. Nor did she wake. She hovered somewhere between, where the bones of the old gods still rattled and sang beneath the world. Her mother, Inga the Red, crouched beside her with trembling fingers. Her lips moved in the rhythm of prayer, but the words were not those taught by the priests of the White Christ in distant, feeble kingdoms. No, these were older words, guttural and bitter, passed down from women who wore bones in their hair and walked barefoot through the snow. Around her neck hung a token carved from elk horn, shaped into the rune for protection, though its edges had worn soft with age. She had hung another over Freydis' chest, but it smoked as though scorched from within. The child's lips had turned the faintest blue. Snorri stood by the fire, arms crossed, face carved in stone. His left eye, cloudy and white, had seen things the other could not. Some said he had once looked upon the shadow that trails the world, and it had never left him. Others claimed it was simply frostbite from a childhood storm. Either way, he saw now that his daughter had crossed into strange ground, and it chilled him deeper than winter ever could. "The sleep is too deep," Inga said at last, her voice a husk. "She wandered too far. She must return on her own," Snorri replied. "No soul can be dragged back from that place by will alone. But she is just a child," Inga hissed, her teeth chattering though the hearth was full. "She does not know the paths. She does not know the signs. What if she meets the pale mare? What if she walks into the roots of the world tree and cannot find her way out?" Snorri did not answer. He stepped forward, knelt beside his daughter, and placed a hand upon her brow. It was ice-cold, as though she had been lain in snow. Yet her heart still beat, slow and deep like a war drum beneath earth. He closed his eyes and inhaled. There, beneath the fire, beneath the reek of wool and smoke, he caught it. The scent of stone and moss and something else. Murkvar. The shadow forest. The place of trial and omen. Somehow, her spirit had wandered there, though no one in Eldervac had spoken of the path in many winters. He rose and went to the old chest beside the wall, buried beneath animal hides. From it he drew a horn of dark wood and bound iron, capped in carved bone. He handed it to Inga, whose hands shook as she took it. "Wake the others," he said. "Burn the roots. Not the dromaspa. The elder kind. The cursed kind. The black root." She looked up at him in horror. "But that will call them." "It already has," he said, and his bad eye shimmered with something that could have been regret, or knowing. Inga moved swiftly, drawing the others from sleep. Hagar, the youngest son, still clutching his whittling knife in sleep. Brinjar, the elder, whose dreams were plagued by storm chants and sea serpents. Old Thruda, Snorri's sister, whose tongue had long been silent but whose hands still remembered the old signs. They gathered in a circle around the fire, placing the girl in its heart, and dropped the slivers of black root into the flames. The smoke that rose was thick, slow, and bitter as bile. It drifted not upward, but outward, pressing into the corners of the room like ink through water, filling their lungs, pressing against their eyes. It tasted of iron and mold and old, blood-drenched loam. Then the dreaming began. None of them fell asleep, and yet none remained entirely in their skins. The firelight dimmed, or perhaps the air grew too thick to carry its glow. Around them, the longhouse vanished. The stone floor became soft and moss-covered. The beams bent upward, growing into branches that dripped with moisture and ancient rot. Somewhere beyond the veil, wolves sang, not to the moon, but to something deeper. Something beneath it. In this place, Friday stood barefoot in a glade of lightless trees, her hands open and empty. Before her stood a figure in a cloak of ravens, face hidden, skin the color of bleached driftwood. It had no eyes, only sockets filled with starlight, and from its mouth hung strips of seaweed and black feathers. It raised one hand and pointed to the north, where the trees bent inward and the snow glowed faintly red. Friday looked back once, unsure, but the figure nodded solemnly, and she obeyed. The others saw glimpses, fragments, of her journey. A river of skulls frozen mid-scream. A stag made of shadow with antlers like twisted roots. A tower with no doors, only windows that bled candlelight and whispered names in the dark. Yet none could follow her. They only watched. They only waited. And then the girl returned. With a gasp, Friday arched her back, eyes flying open. Her breath came sharp and ragged, her face slick with cold sweat. Her lips moved, and a name fell from them, not her own, not one known to any in the room. But it burned like a brand in their minds. Inga caught her to her chest, sobbing with relief, but the child did not embrace her. She only stared at the ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. She walked beyond sleep, Snorri murmured. And something walked with her. The blackroot fire died to cinders, and the longhouse felt suddenly small. Outside, the wind howled anew, and in it were words no tongue should shape. That night, no one in Eldervac slept. Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, like ash from a god's funeral pyre, veiling the valley in a hush that seemed to come from beneath the earth rather than above it. The forest loomed in pale silence beyond the village, its pines heavy with frost, their branches sagging under the weight of years and secrets. Beneath their boughs, the air was different, thicker, older. And on that night, as the third sunless dusk crept over Eldervac, the villagers gathered by the longhouse fire of Ursa Flamehair to witness the dream smoke ritual. It was not a thing done lightly, nor without risk, for the rite did not call upon the gods, but upon that which lay between them, the drifting powers, the rootless spirits, the watchers who waited in the corners of dreams. The hall was silent but for the crackle of the hearth and the distant groan of ice shifting on the fjord. The gathered folk, elders, weavers, warriors, the old bent priest who still bore the houndbite scar from the Hagel raid, sat close in a circle around the stone-lined fire. They wrapped themselves in wolf-pelts and sealskin, not against cold, but against whatever might slip from the waking world into the smoke. The air was rich with the resinous scent of pitch pine and the tang of dried fish. But beneath it all pulsed the bitter reek of the dream root, this sacred bark boiled to extract the dreaming vapors, and now left to curl and blacken on the coals. The smoke rose in thin tendrils, gray at first, then shifting, darkening, taking on the blue hue of a summer midnight sky. It drifted low, crawling along the floor before rising in curls and loops toward the rafters, where it coiled like slumbering WIRMS among the carved joists. Ursa stood beside the fire, clad in a robe dyed with woad and stitched with the runes of sleep and silence. Her hair, wild and crimson, caught the firelight and seemed to burn with its own life. In her hand she held a bowl carved from whalebone, within which floated the last fragment of drama skin, the skin of dream, scraped from the skull of a drowned seeress, and said to carry the memory of the deep. Her lips moved in chant, but no words passed through the room. The sound of her voice belonged to another world. Even those closest to her could only feel the vibration of it in their chest bones, like a storm rolling far beneath the ground. The villagers breathed in the smoke, eyes open but unfocused, their minds sliding loose from their flesh like seals slipping into water. The fire crackled louder, though it gave no more heat, and somewhere deep in the flames a shape began to form, a line of figures trudging across a frozen plain, hunched and faceless, dragging behind them something vast and shrouded. Friedis, seated beside her mother, blinked once, and her pupils vanished like ink pulled back into the quill. She did not tremble. She did not breathe. The smoke had taken her gently, like a wave pulling a child beneath. Outside, the wind shifted. It brought with it the sound of bells, not the high jingle of eel silver but deep, rusted chimes that spoke of thresholds and endings. The dogs howled, then went quiet. The watchers at the edge of the village turned their faces to the forest, but saw nothing. The snow no longer fell. It simply hung in the air, suspended, waiting. Within the longhouse, Ursa knelt and began to draw the sleep sigil in the ash. Her fingers moved slow and sure, carving the spiral that bent back upon itself, then forked like antlers, then opened into a maw. As she worked, the smoke thickened, and voices began to stir within it. Not words. Not names. Merely feelings, old and unclean. The longing of something that had never been born. The hunger of a mouth that had never been fed. The grief of a death that was not yet permitted. The smoke answered with shape. From it emerged the shadow of a cradle, rocking gently without hand or wind, and a single eye, lidless and vast, watching from just beyond the firelight. Brynjar, the son of Snorri, rose to his feet as if called. His limbs were stiff, jerking like those of a marionette. His eyes stared straight ahead, unfocused. In one hand he held a length of driftwood wrapped in sinew. He stepped into the circle, barefoot, his soles pale and calloused. He walked to the fire and stood within the coals. The flames licked around his ankles, but he did not burn. He raised the driftwood high and struck the earth once, twice, 3 times. With the final blow, the sound of it split the air like the snapping of old ice. From the smoke came a voice, clear, dry, ageless. "Why do you wake us?" Ursa did not answer with words, but her gesture said enough. She lifted the bowl high, and the smoke hissed in sudden hunger. The voice laughed, a thin, cruel laugh like knives tapping glass. "So, the sleepers would know why they sleep." The fire flared blue, then green, and the shadows surged outward, stretched long and jagged across the walls. Each person in the room saw something different in the smoke. An old man weeping blood over a cradle of thorns. A woman dressed in seaweed leading a line of children into the surf. A bear with human hands bound in chains of frost. But all saw the same final vision, a vast bed of stone in the heart of the mountain, upon which lay a great figure shrouded in furs and time. Its breath was the rhythm of the earth. Its dreams gave shape to the world. And it stirred. The smoke recoiled. The fire dimmed to embers. Ursa collapsed to her knees, coughing blood. The bowl fell from her hands and shattered on the hearth. The spell was broken. Flames seemed hesitant to crackle, as though they feared waking something not yet returned to slumber. Friedis, the last to stir, blinked once, then again, and leaned into her mother's embrace with a quiet that was no longer entirely childlike. Ursa raised her head at last, her face pale as birch bark, her voice rasping. "Now you know," she said, "why the old ones slept well, and why we do not." Outside, the snow fell again, slow and silent, and the sky above Eldavak turned a shade too dark for night. In the high country where mist forever clings to the crags and the trees grow stunted, twisted by centuries of wind and silence, there stood a solitary cairn upon the slope of Roikfjall. The mountain was old, older than men, older perhaps than the bones of the gods, and the locals spoke its name only in hushed tones. It was said to breathe in winter, to whisper in summer, and to weep when stars fell from the sky. And upon its flanks, beyond the paths worn by goats and hunters, there lived the seeress. Few had seen her. Fewer still had returned the same after doing so. Her hut was not built, it had grown, it was said, of the stone and lichen, shaped by wind and smoke and time. Smoke did rise from it, thin and white, drifting unnaturally against the breeze, curling back toward the peak as if reluctant to leave the mountain's grasp. On the fourth day of silence in Eldavak, when even the birds seemed to have forgotten their songs, Halda Stoneborn climbed the mountain. Wrapped in a cloak of thick, salt-cured seal fur and bearing the staff of his line, ashwood bound in tarnished bronze, he walked without pause, though his breath came in hard clouds and his knees creaked with each step. Snow cracked beneath his boots, but otherwise the world made no sound. Even the ravens, usual heralds of fate, did not follow him. The weight of sleep hung over the village, not in comfort now, but in oppression. Children who had once woken with cheeks flushed and limbs refreshed now slept longer, unmoving, pale as carved driftwood. Two had not opened their eyes at all, though their hearts still beat. Something stirred beneath the crust of the world, and the old ways no longer held it at bay. The climb took him the length of a day, though the sun never rose. Twilight reigned, unbroken, a perpetual blue darkness that cast the world in half-shadow. When at last he reached the shelf of stone where the seeress was said to dwell, he paused, not from weariness, but from reverence. The hut crouched low against the slope, its roof of woven moss and bone glistening with frost. No door marked its entrance, only a curtain of hanging bones, deer ribs, fish jaws, fragments of antler, each etched with runes too fine to read. They swayed gently, though the wind did not blow. Halda stood before the curtain and lowered his head. He said no name, for the seeress had none. Names were for the living. She was older than that. A voice came from within, not loud, but absolute. "You come late, Stoneborn." "I come when the mountain called," he said, and the curtain parted of its own accord. Inside, the hut was warm, thick with the scent of herbs and decay. The walls were stitched hides, some patterned with runes, others with scenes, serpents biting their tails, wolves chasing the sun, a great tree dripping blood from its branches. The fire in the center did not burn with flame, but with a glow like embers fallen from the sky. Around it sat the seeress. Her hair was white, not with age, but as if snow itself had grown from her scalp. Her skin was the gray of birch bark, and her eyes, when they met his, were milky pools that reflected nothing, not even the fire. She did not smile, nor did she frown. Emotion passed over her face like the shadow of clouds on water, present yet weightless. "You bring questions," she said. "But the answers are heavier than you can bear." "I do not seek answers," Halda said, lowering himself before the fire. "I seek a path." She tilted her head, listening to something far off. "There is no path. Only drift." "Then let me drift. But I must know the tide." The seeress reached beside her, where a small trough of water shimmered in the flickering light. From a pouch at her side she drew something like dust, too dark for ash, too light for soil, and scattered it across the surface. The water turned black, then clear again, and within it, shapes began to move. A village drowned in mist. A girl with hollow eyes walking a road of bones. A tree struck by lightning, yet burning inward. A sleep not peaceful, but ravenous. "Something feeds," she said, "on what should be sacred." Halda's jaw tensed. "Can it be stopped?" The seeress did not answer. Instead, she reached into the fire with her bare hands and pulled forth a coal, white hot, which she placed into a small bowl of ice. Steam rose in a column, and in it formed the outline of a man. No face, no features, only the unmistakable shape of presence. The figure swayed, its hands moving as if plucking invisible strings. From somewhere deep, the sound of a lullaby drifted into the room, slow and aching. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "A spirit?" "A god once," she said. "Now forgotten. One of those who slept beneath the first snow, dreaming the world into shape. When men stopped giving names, it did not die, it slept deeper. But now the world is loud. Too loud. It stirs." "Why now?" Hulda asked. The seeress leaned closer, her breath a veil of frost. "Because something is awakening it. Not by chance. Not by accident. Something walks the roots of Yggdrasil, seeking what should remain buried." He nodded, his face grave. "Fridas." At this, the seeress's mouth curved, almost imperceptibly. "Ah. The little raven." She walked into the Merkvar. And returned. The seeress reached beneath her robe and drew out a single strand of hair, black as pitch, and tossed it into the fire. The flames roared once, then died to coals. "Then you must go where she went. But know this, Hulda Stoneborn, you are not meant to return." He stood, staff in hand. "I do not seek return. Only stillness." She nodded once. "Then sleep, keeper. Sleep as the old ones did. And may the roots remember your name." She handed him a bundle, tightly wrapped, warm to the touch, and pulsing faintly, like a living heart. He did not unwrap it. He knew it for what it was, Dramaflot, the sleeping fleece, spun from dreams and bound in death silk. Hulda turned without another word and stepped back into the cold. The wind had returned, keening low over the snow, and the stars above shivered in a sky too deep for comfort. Behind him, the seeress whispered a blessing not meant for ears. Before him, the mountain opened its path, and in the shadows between the trees, something vast and old stirred once more. So Hulda walked on, carrying not hope, but purpose. For sleep had begun to rot in Eldervac, and only the old gods knew how to bury a dream that refused to end. The wind screamed like a beast flayed alive as Hulda descended Roikfjall, the sleeping fleece tight across his shoulders, humming faintly against his spine like the last breath of a dying god. The path was no path at all, only ice-slick stone and broken branches slick with hoarfrost, curling underfoot as if to trap him in the mountain's grasp. The sky had paled to the color of dead flesh, a lifeless silver that cast no shadow, and yet every tree seemed to stretch long across the snow, their forms warped and wrong, like echoes from a world forgotten. Time no longer passed in measures known to men. The sun had not risen in days, nor had it set. It merely hovered, an absence rather than a presence, and beneath it, the land held its breath. By the time he reached the lower edge of the forest, a place known in the old tongue as Svefnskar, the sleep cleft, the snow had ceased to fall, and all sound with it. Even the crows were gone. Even the breath of the trees had vanished. There, beneath an ancient pine split down the middle by some long-dead lightning strike, he knelt and drew the 9th rune into the frost. Not many dared speak of the 9th. It was said to be carved not by man, but by something that came before carving, before runes, before breath. Its shape was not meant for mortal minds, twisting inward, devouring itself, a symbol of forgetting and remembering bound together. Yet he knew it from the dreams of his youth, when he woke weeping and could not say why. With a bone knife, he opened the palm of his hand and let his blood fall into the rune's core. The snow hissed where it landed, turning black. He murmured no chant. None was needed. The rune itself was the invocation. And as the blood vanished into the earth, the world tilted. The trees breathed in. The air thickened like smoke from damp wood, and the ground beneath him gave a low, groaning sigh. From the trees came a figure. It stepped lightly, its form slender and veiled in mist, its face hidden behind a mask of carved wood, smooth, eyeless, in the shape of a sleeping wolf. It bore a staff not unlike Hulda's, though carved with different symbols, curved, thorn-like, trembling as though alive. Around its waist hung tiny bells that did not ring, though they should have, and from its shoulders trailed a cloak of woven reeds and raven feathers. It stopped just short of the rune, tilting its head. "You bear the fleece," it said, voice brittle as frost. "I was given it by the seeress," Halder replied. "I seek the Merkvar." The masked figure laughed, a dry sound, like cracked bark. "None seek the Merkvar. It finds them. I would walk where the girl walked. I would know what feeds upon our sleep." The figure knelt beside the rune and touched it with 2 fingers. Its hand was gloved in bark, or perhaps bone. The rune flared once, then dimmed. "Then the path is open. But know this, each step forward is a step unmade. You may find what you seek, but you will not remember the seeking. That is the price of the 9th. Halder's eyes narrowed. "So be it." The figure stood and stepped aside. "Then pass, keeper. And dream with open eyes." He crossed the rune's circle and the world blinked. One moment he was in the snow-choked clearing, the next he stood at the edge of a forest too vast to exist, too dark to be real. Its trees were black as pitch, their branches hung with strands of what looked like silk but moved like worms. The air buzzed faintly, like breath through a hollow reed. And there, beyond the first line of trunks, pulsed a soft red glow, as if the forest bled from its heart. This was Merkvar, the Shadowwood, the forest from which all dreams flowed and into which all forgotten things returned. He stepped forward. The ground was soft, spongy, covered in a thick carpet of moss that hissed when touched. The light dimmed the deeper he went, though no sun pierced the canopy. Shades shifted at the corners of his vision, eyes without faces, limbs that vanished when looked upon. Once he passed a tree that bled openly from a split in its bark, the blood steaming in the cold. Once he heard a lullaby sung in a voice that might have been his mother's, though she had died before the snows took his beard. Then he saw it. At the heart of a grove where no wind stirred and the silence screamed with tension, lay a stone slab. Upon it, etched in a spiral that seemed to turn even as he watched, was the 9th rune, burned not into the surface, but beneath it, as though the stone had formed around the mark. Laying across it was a body. Not dead, not living. Asleep. Friedis. Her hair fanned around her like ink in water, her chest rising and falling slow as the tide. Around her eyes, faint lines of red marked where dreams had bled through. Her hands clutched a single thing, a small bone charm, carved into the shape of a serpent devouring its tail. Halder approached slowly, reverently. He did not touch her. Instead, he sat beside the stone and unfurled the sleeping fleece, laying it across his knees. It pulsed once, then quieted. "You were not meant to be here," he whispered, though whether he spoke to Friedis or the forest, he did not know. Then the wind changed. Except there was no wind. From between the trees something moved. It did not walk. It flowed. Tall, formless, cloaked in shivering tendrils of shadow that flickered with runes too ancient for even the gods to read. Where its face might have been was only a hollow, and from it came a sound, a deep, rhythmic beat, like the breathing of mountains. It did not come close. It simply stood and watched. The fleece began to hum. Friedis stirred. The creature raised one hand, long, clawless, empty, and touched its chest, where a faint outline of the 9th rune glowed like coal. Then it turned, and vanished between the trees. The forest exhaled. Friedis sat up. She looked at Halder. Not as a child to an elder, but as one dreamer to another. "I know its name now," she said, voice small but steady. "But it is not to be spoken." Halder nodded. "Then we will carry it in silence." Behind them, the rune upon the stone pulsed once more. Then faded. And the Merkvar, satisfied for now, let them go. The fjord was still as glass, stretching black and unbroken beneath a sky choked with gray, where clouds hung thick and unmoving like smoke from 1,000 extinguished hearths. No gulls cried. No fish broke the water. Only the breath of the tide, so subtle it seemed the earth itself whispered in its sleep, stirred the shallows. The village of Eldervac clung to the shore like a wound half-healed, its longhouses hunched against the biting mist, smoke curling in sluggish spirals from their low chimneys. On this bleak morning, if morning it could still be called, the watchers stood by the fjord, as they had for generations, gazing into the water with eyes that did not blink. They were 6, 3 men, 3 women, clad in cloaks of seal hide and wolf fur, their faces painted in ash and ochre, the symbols old and unspoken. Each bore the mark of wakefulness, a circle within a triangle inked above the left eye, a charm of bone and sinew hanging from the right wrist. They had not slept for 9 days. It was their burden, their vigil, their ancient right. For when the village slept, someone had to remain awake to hold the line between dream and flesh. Not to guard the people from the waking world, but to shield them from what stirred beneath it, what pressed from within. Ira of the North Rocks, the eldest among them, leaned on her staff as she peered across the water. Her skin was leathery and wind-chapped, her eyes like pale sapphires buried deep in frost. She had watched this fjord since her youth, since the days when the old gods were spoken of freely and men did not laugh at the shape of trees. She could still remember the year the sea turned red with herring and the sky went dark for weeks. That was the first time she saw them, shapes beneath the surface, too long, too still, and wrong. Not fish, not whales. Something else. Something dreaming. A boy named Leaf stood beside her, only 16 winters but marked by the sight. He had the pale hair of a winterborn and a strange streak of white in one eyebrow that had never darkened. He spoke little. He listened well. When he looked into the water, he did not see only his reflection, he saw into something deeper. He saw the shadows that moved when no wind stirred, the patterns that echoed ancient runes in the ripple of waves. Lately, he had been seeing more. "They are closer," he said, voice raw from cold and silence. Ira turned to him slowly. "How do you know?" "They blink now." She did not ask what he meant. She only looked back at the water and tightened her grip on the staff carved from driftwood washed ashore the same day her sister drowned. Below, the fjord shifted. Not violently. Just once. A subtle swell, as if something vast had turned in sleep. The others said nothing. They had seen enough in recent days to know the tide had turned. The sleepers in Eldervac were no longer merely resting. They were listening. Each morning they awoke later. Each night they fell faster. One had begun speaking in dreams, words not in any tongue known to men, but heavy with meaning. Old Thruda, bent with age and once dumb from birth, had risen in the night and walked barefoot into the snow, her eyes closed, her breath steady. When they found her, she was kneeling at the fjord's edge, whispering to the water. The watchers had tightened the circles. They took shifts now in overlapping pairs, never leaving one alone, always staring into the tide. And today, the tide stared back. It began near dusk. The mist thickened, curling like fingers around the stones. The water changed hue, not visibly, but perceptibly, as if it remembered being darker. And then, between the twin standing stones placed by the first settlers long before the sagas began, they saw movement. A figure rose from the water, not breaching, not swimming. Simply rising. First a head, crowned in kelp and small white shells that clung like barnacles. Then shoulders, draped in something not fabric but moving, wet, and glistening with veins of light. Its face bore no features, yet each of the watchers knew it watched them. It was not alone. All along the fjord, shapes emerged, silent and slow, men made of water, or women perhaps, or things that once were both and neither. Their limbs were long, fingers webbed, skin translucent, revealing hints of bones like coral and nerves that pulsed faintly blue. Ira stepped forward. She raised her staff and drove it into the ground, the impact ringing like a dull bell through the earth. "I name you unbidden," she said. "I name you forgotten. This land is sealed. Return to your depths." The figures did not move. But their presence deepened. The air thickened with salt and sleep. Leaf dropped to one knee, eyes rolling back, a tremor in his jaw. One of the women, Kara, fierce and tall, reached to steady him, but froze mid-step. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened. She had heard a name. It had no sound. No letters. But it pressed into her skull like a branding iron, and in it was contained all weariness, all slumber, all eternity. The tide surged once, and then the shape sank. Not retreating, sinking, as if stepping down a stair into the bones of the earth. The fjord calmed. The mist receded. The water stilled once more. But something had changed. Leif gasped awake and looked at Ira, his expression hollow. They spoke. They know we remember. Ira said nothing. She looked toward the village, smoke rising from its hearths like thin offerings to a sky that no longer cared. Something ancient was waking. Not just beneath the trees. Not just in the woods. But in the water. In the fjord that had fed them for generations. In the tides that once lulled babes to sleep. The watchers resumed their vigil. But now they did not only watch the water. They watched the village too. For the dream had breached the shore. And not all who slept would return. The wind came down from the high ridges like a lash, shrieking across the open fields and twisting through the village like the cry of something hunted. The bones of the land trembled with it, rafters groaned, doors rattled in their frames, and smoke from the hearths coiled low and clung to the earth like frightened children. It was the 7th night since the dreaming deepened, and no one in Eldervax spoke above a whisper. The air had changed. Not merely colder, not simply heavier, but hollow, as though the world itself had been carved out, leaving only a shell of frost and echo. On this night, as the sky hung bruised and low over the frozen village, the wolves began to howl. At first it was a single voice, distant, ragged, drawn out like a dying breath, and many turned in their beds, thinking it a dream. But then others joined. From the cliffs above the fjord. From the woods beyond the burial mounds. From the far side of the river where no wolves had been seen in generations. Their voices rose in eerie unison, weaving a lament that did not cease with the night's turning, but only deepened. It was not the song of hunger, nor the call of a pack marking territory. It was a dirge. Low, mournful, and ancient. And those who heard it knew instinctively. It was not meant for the ears of the living. Within the longhouse of Snorri Colai, the fire had died. His kin lay restless beneath their furs, murmuring in their sleep, limbs twitching in unspoken terror. Freydis, the girl who had returned from the Merkvar, sat awake beside the cold hearth, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on the door. She had not spoken in 2 days. Not since she whispered the nameless truth into the ear of the seeress's raven and watched it fly off into the void of the storm. Her silence was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of knowing. Snorri himself stood near the entrance, axe in hand, though no enemy would be met with steel tonight. His one good eye stared through the slats of the door into the dark, watching the snow move in strange, circular patterns. Once he would have said it was the wind. Now he knew better. Wind does not hum. Wind does not follow paths carved by runes only seers remember. And wind does not pause when you watch it. From the edge of the village came the sound of barking, sharp and sudden, then cut short. Silence returned like a cloak thrown over the land, suffocating, thick. Then the wolves howled again, and this time, they were closer. The watchers gathered at the edge of the eastern field, 6 figures shadowed against the white. Their torches flickered in the wind, but none went out. Kara of the hollow throat, her voice robbed by the names spoken within the fjord, raised a hand to halt the others. She pointed toward the treeling. At first, nothing stirred. But then, in the gaps between the trees, eyes began to appear. Dozens. Maybe more. Amber and gleaming, fixed and unblinking. Shapes moved behind them, low to the ground, crawling, slinking, but with a gait not entirely lupin. They were wolves, yes. But they were not. One stepped forward, out of the shadows and into the light of the torches. Its body was massive, for dark and matted, ribs showing like warped iron beneath the skin. But its face was wrong. Too human. The eyes too knowing. The mouth too still. Around its neck hung a string of small bones, finger bones, tied with sinew, each inscribed with a rune of sleep. It did not growl. It did not snarl. It simply watched. Ira stepped forward. Her voice, though ragged, did not falter. We remember you, she said. Thongborn. Moonlost. Dream eaters. The wolf cocked its head slightly, as if in recognition. You walk when men sleep, she continued. You feed where memory falters. The creature's mouth opened then, but it did not speak. Instead, it exhaled, and a wave of bitter cold rolled across the snow, extinguishing 2 torches in an instant. The watchers did not move. The others behind the lead wolf began to step forward, one by one, silent as frost fall. Their bodies twitched in strange rhythms, as though the bones inside moved in disagreement with the flesh. And then they howled. It was no sound born of throat or lung. It was a sound from the other side of thought, a sound that curved inward, bending the air itself. It tore through the minds of the watchers like claws on stone. Leaf fell to his knees, hands over his ears, blood dripping from his nose. Kara stumbled back, mouth open in a scream that found no breath. From the longhouse, Friday stood. Her head tilted slightly, and her eyes rolled back, not in fear, but in invocation. She raised one hand, and the runes inked upon her palm glowed faintly with blue fire. Across the village, others began to stir. Not the elders. Not the strong. But the children. They rose from their bedding, pale and calm, and walked toward the doors. Their feet made no sound upon the earth. Their eyes were shut. And each murmured a line of the same song, a lullaby older than the land. No 2 voices matched in verse, but the harmony was perfect. The wolves stopped. The lead beast turned its head sharply, gaze fixing not on the watchers, but on the village beyond. It growled now, low and guttural. Not rage. Not warning. Recognition. Then came the sound of splitting wood. One of the longhouses had collapsed inward, not from fire, not from storm, but from weight. From within, the sound of heavy breathing echoed. Something vast, something unseen. And the wolves turned and fled, not into the forest, but into the dreams of those who watched them. The howl did not fade. It lingered. Inside. In the wake of the silence, Frida's fell. Snorri caught her before her head struck stone. Her breath came slow and ragged, her mouth flecked with frost. But in her hand, clutched tight, was a single tooth, not a wolf's, but a human's, etched with the 9th rune. The watchers stood amidst the snow and torch ash, broken and dazed. And all of them knew the truth now. The wolves did not come to hunt. They came to warn. The mountain above Eldervak had vanished. Not in body, for Roikrafjall still loomed like a slumbering beast over the valley, its flanks swathed in snow and shadow, its ridges sharp as the teeth of some forgotten god. But the soul of the mountain, its voice, gone. For 3 days now, it had made no sound, not even the low groans of ice shifting through its berry veins. And that silence was a worse omen than any scream. The villagers dared not look toward it. The clouds that clung to its peak no longer moved with the wind. They circled, endlessly, like vultures around a carcass too large to rot. The seeress had not been seen since the last moonless night. Her hut now stood cold and dark, the bones at its threshold blackened, the runes along its frame warped as if the wood had wept and twisted in grief. In the shadow of that hushed mountain, the longhouse of the dead had opened. It was not a building, but a place, half real, half legend, known in the old speech as Draughts. The death hearth. It did not sit upon the map. It could not be found by walking, nor stumbled upon by chance. It appeared only when the veil thinned, when the world no longer knew whether it dreamt or woke. And now, in the deepest hollow of the valley, behind the trees that never bent to the wind, it had begun to breathe. Halder felt its pulse long before he saw it. A dull throb beneath the soles of his feet, not of blood, but of something deeper, something primordial. He walked not by trail, but by sense, carrying Fridas in his arms, her body limp yet still warm, her breath fogging faintly against his beard. The tooth she had clutched, marked with the 9th rune, now hung around her neck on a cord of braided flax. The rune burned faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. He followed the rhythm as one follows the sound of a war drum through smoke. The path narrowed between the trees, the forest shifting subtly with each step. Branches grew longer, reaching like arms across the trail. Stones rearranged themselves when he was not looking. At one point, he passed the same moss-covered stump 3 times in a circle. The air thickened with the scent of old iron and damp fir. And finally, when he no longer expected it, the trees fell away and the longhouse stood before him. It was enormous, more than any dwelling of man should be, its roof sagging under centuries of snow that never melted, its beams of black timber scarred by claws too large for any beast. No light shone from within, yet the windows glowed with a faint red hue, like coals buried deep in ash. Ravens clustered along the eaves, silent and unmoving, their feathers ruffled as if against a storm that had not yet come. At the base of the great carved door, a figure waited. It was neither man nor woman, tall and narrow beneath a cloak of skins that shimmered like frost over bone. Its face was hidden by a mask shaped like an ox's skull, gilded with thin veins of silver. It did not speak nor move, but when Halda stepped forward, the door groaned open on its own. The warmth that issued forth was not comforting. It was thick and old, the heat of burials, of long-rotted meat and deep earth. Yet Friday stirred in his arms, and her lips parted in a sigh. He entered. Inside was not what he expected. There were no beds, no fires, no kin gathered in remembrance. There was only a great pit in the center of the floor, lined with iron and filled with dark water that did not reflect. Above it, the rafters hung low, thick with cobwebs, and from them dangled dozens of small totems, bones, teeth, braids of hair, old coins blackened with time. The walls were covered in fur, stitched into scenes, battles that never occurred, beasts with too many eyes, a tree with roots that bled. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform carved from stone, stood a throne of antlers. Upon it sat a figure. It was vast, cloaked in shadows, its form wrapped in layers of hide and ash-dyed linen. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its breath fogged the air before it, steady and deep. From its sleeves hung hands too large, their nails curved like talons, their fingers twitching as though dreaming. Around its neck lay a collar of stone, engraved with runes that shifted when looked upon. Halda knelt. "I bring the girl," he said. "She walked the forest, bore the mark, saw the thing beneath the fjord. She holds what we have forgotten." The figure stirred. Not rising. Not reaching. Only breathing louder. Then, from the shadows beside the throne, stepped an old man. Bent, pale, and blind, with milky eyes and lips stained dark with berries. "The ice-bound god listens," the man said. "But it will not speak. Not unless the girl offers the name." Halda looked to Friday. Her eyes were open now. Pale. Clear. Unafraid. "I will not speak it," she said. "But I will show it." She reached to the rune at her neck and pressed her hand to it. The hall shuddered. The pit boiled. The throne creaked beneath its ancient occupant. And from the girl's hand came a light, not bright, not hot, but heavy. It filled the hall with stillness. The totems overhead began to sway. The runes along the collar flared. The water in the pit stilled and became mirror smooth. Then the god rose. It was not a movement. It was a realization that it had always been rising, slow and eternal, and now it had merely reached a point of understanding. Its hood fell back, revealing no face, only an endless void of frost and memory. The air grew brittle. Breath turned to shards. Even time seemed to stutter. And then the god spoke, not in words, but in the groaning of timber, the snapping of ice, the slow scream of glaciers cracking after 10,000 years. "Let sleep return," the god intoned. Friday nodded. And then she collapsed. Halda caught her again, trembling. The old man stepped forward, touching her brow. "She gave it form," he said softly. "Now it will hunger less." Outside, the mountain groaned once more. And the world remembered how to sleep. Night fell like a curtain of iron, swift and absolute, snuffing out the faint gray light that had clung to Eldavak for days without sun. The air did not cool, it froze. Even breath came slow and brittle, as though the world itself had turned to glass. The fjord no longer stirred. It was sealed, locked in ice as smooth as obsidian and thick enough to mute the groaning of the deep. Stars did not shine. Instead, a dim green ribbon hung low across the heavens, flickering without rhythm, pulsing in quiet unease. The villagers, what few still rose from their beds, moved slowly now, wrapped in layers of wool and silence. Their voices came low and fragmented, as if unwilling to break the strange stillness that gripped their bones. No fires burned high. No children laughed. And through it all, a single name began to slip through the cracks of waking thought: Mimir. In the old tales, Mimir was the keeper of the well that lay at the roots of Yggdrasil, the tree that bound all realms. He had drunk of its waters and traded his head for wisdom. A god, or close enough. A guardian. But in Eldervac, they knew another version, older, crueler, buried in the bones of barrowmen and whispered in the bitter days before the first longhouse was raised. Mimir had not been severed. He had been buried. Alive. Bound beneath stone with a cup of ashwood and horn beside him. And it was said that when the world grew too loud, when the living forgot how to dream, he would stir again, not to grant wisdom, but to drink it back. That night the well was found. It had not been there the day before. The field where goats once grazed now bore a circle of frost-cracked stones, their edges rimed in white, their surfaces inscribed with runes that shifted when stared at. In the center, a pit yawned open, not deep, but dark, impossibly dark, the sort that seemed to draw breath and memory alike. Leif, the boy marked by dreams, found it first. He had not spoken since the wolves came, and now he stood by the pit with eyes wide, his skin pale and drawn. In his hands he held a cup. Snorri and Kara arrived soon after. Halder came later, Freydis draped over his back like a burden too sacred to put down. She had not awoken since the god rose in the longhouse of the dead, though her breath remained steady. Around her neck the runes still pulsed, softer now, as if sleeping. The watchers gathered in a half-circle. No one dared cross the ring of stones. The pit exhaled mist, and in that mist, voices swam, fragmented, distant, pleading. Some heard loved ones long gone. Others heard themselves screaming in tones they had never known. Leif stepped forward and placed the cup on the earth. "I found it beneath my bed," he said, voice thin but clear. "Wrapped in seaweed. Wet. And warm." Snorri took a slow breath. "Then Mimir thirsts." Kara looked toward Halder, but he did not speak. His eyes were closed. He knelt beside Freydis and placed a hand on her forehead. "She dreams still," he murmured. "But not alone." From the pit came a sound, not a roar, nor a groan, but the sound of weeping stone. A tremor passed through the ground, subtle but unmistakable. One of the stones cracked straight down its center. The cup tipped slightly, then righted itself. It was bone-white, shaped like the curve of a horn, and inside was nothing but shadow. Ira, ancient among the watchers, stepped forth. Her knees bent like ice-laden branches, but her voice remained strong. "Drinkers we are no longer," she said, "but dreamers. Let him drink instead." At her word they began the rite. A circle of chants, slow and wordless, passed from throat to throat like smoke from fire. Each watcher bled a drop into the soil, not into the cup, for the cup was not for the living. The earth drank, and in turn the pit answered. The mist thickened. Shapes began to take form in the shadows, tall, cloaked, faceless. They did not move. They only watched. Then the cup overflowed. What poured from it was not water. It was memory, clear and colorless, shimmering like oil on snow. Scenes flickered in the mist, children playing in the spring sun, elders whispering tales beside fire, a woman combing her hair by the river, a boy feeding a wounded fox. All memories. All fading. The wind shifted and the visions unraveled, drawn back toward the pit. The shadows leaned closer. Freydis stirred. She did not wake, but her lips moved. "Mimir waits." Halder opened his eyes. "If we do not give him truth," he said, "he will take what is unspoken." Leif stepped to the edge of the stone circle, the mist clinging to his legs. His eyes rolled back, and he fell to his knees. "I see him," he said. He has no eyes. He has no mouth. But he knows. He knows we have tried to bury the old sleep beneath loud things. Light. Noise. Time. He waits beneath, drinking all we forget. And we have forgotten too much. Snorri moved to pull the boy back, but the pit flared with light, white, searing, cold. For a moment they saw the bottom. A face. Pale. Cracked. Smiling with no lips. And then it was gone. The cup was empty again. Kara whispered, "Is it done?" But Iris shook her head. "It has begun." They left the pit untouched. Covered it not. Marked it not. For to seal it would be to deny what had already returned. Instead, they watched as the green sky rippled overhead, and the wind began to sing with new voices. That night, those who had slept lightly now slept deeply. Those who had suffered dreams now dreamt of peace. But one by one, each villager would, in time, see a face in their dreams, a face not theirs, not anyone's, but familiar in the way frost is familiar to the mountain. Mimir drank. And he remembered. The dead did not speak, but their breath lingered in Eldervac. It crept through the eaves of longhouses and curled beneath sleeping skins, sifting through the furs like fingers through grain. The air had turned sour in places, sweet in others, carrying hints of burning yew, stale mead, blooded stone, and something fouler still, the scent of earth cracked open before its time. In the 10th night, since the first howl echoed from the cliffs, the villagers began to dream not of beasts or gods, but of their own kin, long dead, walking again by hearth and hill. Some called out from sleep. Some wept. Others rose and followed the voices, barefoot through snow and ash, whispering names as though repeating them could bring back the warmth of those who bore them. But warmth did not follow. Only silence. Only the breathless cold of the grave. Deep beneath the southern hill, where the old burial mounds rose like knuckles through snow, the hearths of the dead flickered into being. They had not burned in generations. Their flames did not catch from flint nor coal, but from memory. And when they lit, it was said the ancestors stirred. No firewood fueled them, only bones and stories. Their glow was pale, like milk left in moonlight, and their smoke did not rise but sank. It drifted through the roots of the hill, coiling into caverns where once chieftains had lain crowned in gold and antler, their oaths sealed with iron and blood. Fridas was carried there by nightfall, though she had still not opened her eyes. Halder bore her on his back, a thick woolen cloak shielding her from the wind, her small hands clenched tight over the 9th rune. Her pulse was slow, her skin cool. Yet the seeress had whispered through the ravens, "When the flames beneath stir, so shall she." And so the watchers made their way through the hollow paths, past stone markers worn faceless by centuries, into the mouth of the barrow where no one had walked since the time of Snow Kings. The inside of the mound was wider than it seemed from without. Walls of stone curved overhead like the inside of a skull, ribbed with roots and lined with talismans too ancient for memory. Some bore runes of peace. Others were wards of sleep. But many were unknown, etched in a language that did not belong to the world above. The smell within was thick and warm, like lichen and copper, like old fires dampened and forgotten. Shadows clung to corners where light should never have reached. And yet at the very heart, 5 hearths now burned, low, blue, and unwavering. Around each sat a cairn of bones, arranged not in reverence, but in invitation. They placed Fridas in the center, upon a slab of slate wrapped in bearskin. She did not shiver, did not stir. Her lips were parted, her breath faint and shallow. The rune at her neck glowed softly, the same rhythm as the flames. Halda knelt beside her, resting one hand upon the stone. "She must speak with them," said Ira. "The ones who remembered how to sleep without fear." "The ancestors?" Kara asked, voice hushed, almost reverent. "No," said Ira. "Older. The ones who chose the long sleep when the world was still green and clean. Before men brought iron and fire. The ones who watched the first dreams hatch from frost." Leif moved to one of the hearths, staring into the unnatural fire. In its glow, he saw not flame, but movement, slow spirals of images half formed, a field of stars reflected in black ice, a woman with hollow eyes cradling a child made of roots, a great beast curled in sleep beneath the ocean, chained with words too old to speak. The fire blinked. Leif gasped. He stumbled back, whispering, "They see me." Halder turned to Ira. "What must be done?" The elder woman reached into her satchel and drew forth a pouch of ash bark, sealed with wax. She unbound it with a sharp nail and released a powder of black dust and crushed elder petals. She circled Friedis, sprinkling the mixture in a spiral, murmuring a chant that was not in any tongue spoken by men. It was a rhythm, not a prayer, more wind than word. As she completed the circle, the 5 hearths flared once and dimmed. The barrow trembled. From the bones beside the fires rose figures, not formed, not shaped, but present. A weight in the air. A shadow inside shadow. And with them came a sound like deep water churning far below, slow, vast, and inevitable. Friedis opened her mouth. No sound came. Then the rune on her neck flared white. And she spoke, not in her voice, but in a chorus. "We have been buried too long. The sleep of the dead is disturbed by the dreams of the living. You call us, yet fear us. You beg for peace, yet awaken hunger. What is it you seek?" The flames hissed. Halda answered. "We seek the stillness we once knew. Sleep without shadows. Rest without rot. We seek to bury the waking thing that feeds upon our peace." The presence replied, "It is not one. It is many. It is the echo of your own noise. It is born of your forgetting. You left the offerings unmade. You left the night unwatched." Kara stepped forward. "Can we make it right?" For a long time, there was no reply. Then, the flames flickered. The bones began to hum. "The flame must be brought to where no hearth remains. To the hollow hill where dreams are born but not returned. To the void beneath the fjord where sleep cannot go." Freydis's eyes fluttered open. "They mean the drowned barrow," she said softly. Halda's jaw tightened. "No one has crossed the black ice since before the eldest's birth." "Then it is time," Freydis said. The hearths dimmed. The shadows receded. And the ancestors, having spoken, faded back into the stone. The fire remained. Cold. And waiting. The sound came first, low, rhythmic, a groaning deeper than any mortal voice. It rolled up from the fjord in waves that vibrated through the stones beneath Eldravak's feet. Every wall creaked in sympathy, every window shivered with a cold not born of wind. The villagers held still in their longhouses, ears tilted toward the frost-rimed floorboards, their breath drawn sharp and short. Some believed it to be the return of the wolves. Others thought it was the ice-bound god breathing again from beneath the mountain. But those who had walked among the barrows, who had seen the hearths light themselves from memory and mist, knew better. They knew the earth was singing because something below it had begun to stir. Not with rage, not with hunger, but with music. That night, Eldravak did not sleep. Fires were lit, but they gave no comfort. Doors were barred, but they promised no safety. The wind that blew down from the northern pass carried not snow, but a melody, faint and old, like a cradle song sung by a voice long dead. It lilted on the edge of hearing, composed of tones that should not harmonize yet did. Some heard harps. Some heard horns. A few, like Leif, heard their own names sung in voices that belonged to their mothers. Freydis heard nothing at all. But she felt it, inside her chest, inside the rune that pulsed like a second heart beneath her skin. She stood in the village square alone, barefoot in the snow, head tilted skyward. Around her, the green ribbon of the sky rippled like smoke caught in breath. At the edge of the fjord, the ice groaned. Cracks formed, long, elegant lines that branched like veins across the surface, glowing faintly from within. The watchers gathered at the shore, cloaks wrapped tight, eyes full of fear and duty. Kara stood among them, her voice still lost, her hand clutching the flint blade of her mother's line. Ira, stiff with age and burden, raised her staff toward the sea. "The hollow earth sings," she said, "and we must answer." Behind them, The villagers emerged one by one. Men and women, old and young, wrapped in silence and wool. They bore no torches. They brought no tools. Only one thing did they carry: memory. Each held in hand a token of those long gone, a carved comb, a faded belt, a child's doll whose eyes had been stitched anew. The ancestors had spoken. Their song had returned. It needed to be heard. Friday stepped onto the ice first. The cracks did not deepen beneath her feet. Instead, they pulsed, welcoming, guiding. Halder followed, his boots silent on the glassy surface, his shadow long and stretched beneath the aurora's light. Behind him came Leaf, then Kara, then the rest, a slow procession of the living walking across the bones of the fjord, drawn toward the place no one spoke of, the drowned barrow. It did not appear until they were near its threshold. A swell in the ice, a dome barely perceptible against the black surface, its crown glazed with frost that did not melt, not even under firelight. It had no door. It had no window. Only runes, carved in a spiral around the crown, etched deep into the frozen stone, not Norse, not any known tongue, but something older, shapes that bent the eye and twisted the mind. Friday raised her hand, and the rune at her neck flared in sympathy. "Here," she whispered. "The song sleep." They gathered in a circle around the mound. No one spoke. The wind died, and even the stars seemed to retreat. Then Ira stepped forward and knelt. From the pouch at her side she drew a small pipe carved from walrus tusk, its bowl etched with a serpent swallowing the sun. She packed it with blackroot and bone petal, struck flint to spark, and inhaled. The smoke rose, thin and pale, drifting toward the runes. It sank into them. The spiral pulsed once, and the mound began to sing. It was not a sound made by voice or mouth. It was the echo of the earth remembering its own shape. It rumbled deep, deeper than any sea, and resonated in bone and blood. Each villager felt it inside them, a note, unique and familiar, calling to something they had forgotten. Mothers fell to their knees. Fathers wept without shame. Children stood as still as the stone gods of the mountain pass. The air shimmered. The ice beneath their feet turned clear. Beneath them, they saw a city. Not of men. Not of gods. But of sleep. Great halls carved from coral and dream, spires that bent toward invisible moons, roads paved in memory and starlight. The city pulsed, and in its center lay a figure vast and curled, slumbering in chains made of song. Its eyes were closed. Its mouth was stitched with silence. But it dreamed. And its dream was the world. Friday fell forward. Her hand struck the ice. Blood bloomed across the surface like a flower. The rune at her neck shattered into ash. The song stopped. Silence fell again. Then the dome cracked. Not collapsed, not broken, opened. The ice peeled back in petals, revealing a stair of pale stone descending into darkness. No wind emerged. No warmth. Only possibility. Friday stood, barefoot, bloodied, her eyes black as night. "I go," she said. Halder reached to stop her, but Ira caught his arm. She must. One by one, the villagers knelt. Not in worship. In trust. Friday stepped into the stairwell, the frost melting around her as she descended. The song did not resume. But its echo remained, pulsing faintly in every chest. Down she went. Into the city beneath. Into the heart of the hollow earth. Where all songs were born. And all sleep returned. The stair spiraled down into silence, carved from stone that glowed faintly with a hue not known in the world above, something between blue and green, like the color of frozen breath beneath a winter moon. Friday moved slowly, barefoot and pale, her blood still wet upon her heel, leaving a soft trail behind her that steamed against the cold. No torch lit her way. No flame dared burn here. Yet she saw, not with her eyes, but with something older, an instinct carved into her bones by the voice of the god she had never spoken aloud. The further she descended, the more the weight of the world above fell away. Her thoughts quieted. Her heart slowed. Dreams drifted at the edge of her vision like motes in the dark, spinning and flickering with scenes she did not recognize. a man hammering runes into stone with bare fists. A woman cradling a wolf with the face of a child. The sun setting into a bowl of sleep, swallowed by the sea. At last, the stair ended. She stepped onto smooth ground, not of stone nor soil, but something between, soft yet solid, like walking upon old ash. A vast cavern opened before her, the ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness, pierced only by strands of luminescence that hung like spider silk woven from starlight. And in that chamber there was song, not heard, but felt. It thrummed beneath the skin, a melody born not of sound but of memory. It stirred the blood and bent the breath, coaxing tears from eyes that had not wept in years. This was the hollow earth, the place the gods abandoned not in wrath, but in reverence, fearful of what slept here, fearful of waking it too soon. In the center of the chamber lay a vast hollow tree, its trunk blackened with time and scorched by ages, its roots fanned out like veins across the floor. It had no leaves. Its branches reached upward as if pleading. And around its base were scattered the remnants of ancient offerings, bowls of melted bone, shards of sleepstone, rings made from teeth and bound in silver hair. The tree wept slowly from a wound near its heart, sap that glowed with a soft, golden hue, thick as honey, dripping into a basin carved from a single onyx fawn. Friedis approached with reverence, the song louder now in her chest, her breath aligning with its rhythm. At the base of the tree sat a figure. Small. Still. Shrouded in moss and silence. It was a child, no older than Friedis herself, with skin like bark and eyes closed in endless dreaming. From its back grew thin, wiry roots that anchored it to the ground, pulsing faintly with life. Its chest rose and fell so gently it might have been mistaken for death. But it was not dead. It was sleeping. And it was the dreamer. Friedis fell to her knees. She understood now. This was the first sleeper. The one who dreamed the world into being. The one whose slumber bore the stars, whose breath wove mountains, whose heartbeat gave rhythm to the tides. The gods had drawn power from it, and men had stolen stories from its breath, but none dared wake it. None dared take its dream. And yet something had stirred it. Something loud and hungry. Something born not of reverence but of forgetting. Friedis reached into her satchel and drew out the ashes of the 9th rune, the charm she had carried, the mark that had guided her across the veil. She sprinkled it into the basin of golden sap, and the mixture hissed, turned dark, and then brightened to a light so pure it hurt her to look at it. She cupped her hands, dipped them into the basin, and brought the glowing sap to the dreamer's brow. "I give you back the silence," she whispered. "I give you back the stillness." As the sap touched its skin, the child stirred. Its eyes opened. They were endless, black, deep, filled with stars, filled with all the ages of the world. Not frightening. Not cruel. Just vast. And it looked at her. Friedis could not move. Could not breathe. But she did not need to. The dreamer saw her. Knew her. Remembered her from a time before her bones existed, from a place before place. And then it closed its eyes again. The sap in the basin turned to crystal. The song slowed. The cavern sighed. And in that breath, the world changed. Far above, on the surface of the fjord, the villagers watched as the ice around the drowned barrow began to fade, melting not into water, but into mist, rising into the sky like the smoke of a great fire long extinguished. The aurora above dimmed to a gentle green whisper. The stars returned, clear and sharp. And for the first time in many nights, true darkness fell, not cursed, not heavy, but natural. Restful. Halder felt it in his chest. Ira wept openly. Leif smiled for the first time since the wolves sang. Even Kara, voice still stolen, felt her throat open in a gasp. Friedis ascended from the stair just before dawn. She looked older. Taller. Not in flesh, but in presence. The mark upon her neck was gone, but something glowed faintly behind her eyes, like a lantern hidden in a cave. She said nothing. She only nodded. And then she slept. Wherever she lay, the dreams were sweet. And the hollowers sang no more. The thaw came not with sun but with silence. A hush so pure and absolute it pressed against the bones of the villagers like an unseen hand, lulling the world into stillness. Snow no longer fell, nor did the wind stir the trees. The fjord had begun to crack, but slowly, deliberately, as if awakened from a dream it had known too long. Steam lifted from its surface in coiling threads, veiling the black water beneath. Birds, once vanished, circled high above Eldavak once more, their cries distant, uncertain. It was the 13th day since the song ceased, since Fridas returned from beneath the earth with the starlight still hidden behind her eyes. The people did not yet speak of peace, for peace was still a stranger, but their limbs were less heavy, their dreams no longer hunted. And yet something still lingered, a presence not hostile, but watching. In the southern quarter of the village, in a small hall known for its low roof and crooked beams, a boy named Ingvar had not woken. He had gone to sleep on the 12th night like the rest, a soft smile upon his lips, his breath steady as a tide. But by morning, his skin had gone pale and cool, and a strange darkness had formed beneath his eyelids, as though he'd seen something too bright to look away from. His mother wept quietly beside him, her hands brushing his hair back again and again as if repetition might restore him. A hearth burned low nearby, but the warmth did not reach him. The healer came and found no illness. The priest came and found no sin. The seeress did not come at all. Instead, the boy's shadow moved. It was Leif who first noticed it. Standing beside Ingvar's cot with a bowl of water in hand, he watched the firelight flicker and saw the shadow beneath the boy's hand curl unnaturally, turning in upon itself like a knot. It shifted as if tethered to something unseen, something below. He did not speak of it, not aloud. He merely left the water and told Ira. By nightfall, the watchers had gathered in silence, forming a circle outside the boy's home, their eyes turned toward the earth, not the sky. "We've burned the black root," said Kara, her voice returned at last hoarse but whole. "We've sung the dead to stillness. We've walked the hollow earth. Why now? Not all sleep is peace," Ira said, her face gaunt. "Some dreams cling." It was Fridas who answered. She came without word, barefoot still, the frost no longer biting her soles. Her eyes bore the wear of long miles walked beneath the world, and yet she moved like water, without resistance, without sound. She stepped into Ingvar's home and sat beside him. The boy's breath was shallow now. The darkness beneath his eyes pulsed softly, as if echoing a heartbeat not his own. "This is no curse," she said, voiced in a smoke. "This is a return." The others gathered behind her, uncertain. Hulda stood by the door, watching her with the reverence men once gave to stone idols. Leif knelt beside the hearth, his hand trembling just above the flame. "What do you mean?" the mother asked. Her voice was desperate, but not angry. "Has something taken him?" "No," Fridas whispered. "Something was waiting for him." Ingvar twitched then, his fingers curling once, then falling still. Fridas closed her eyes. "There is a place beneath the hollow earth," she said slowly, "that I did not see. A deeper place. Not of sleep or song, but of memory. Raw. Unshaped. It pulls at those whose dreams are clearer." "Why him?" Leif asked. Fridas placed a hand over the boy's chest. "Because he hears." Ira moved closer, leaning heavily on her staff. "Then we must go again. Take him back." Fridas shook her head. "You cannot follow where he is now. No one living can. Not with steps. Not with fire. Only with a gift." She reached into her cloak and drew forth a stone, smooth, round, the color of dusk. It pulsed faintly in her palm, humming low and deep like a bear's breath. Its surface bore a single marking, a spiral within a spiral, drawn in ash. "What is it?" Hulda asked. "A tether," Fridas replied. "The soot-touched boy gave it to me." A hush fell, as though the name itself had weight. The villagers shifted uneasily. Some remembered the tales, half-whispered warnings told to children on the cusp of sleep. Of a boy born of smoke and ruin, whose skin was always warm, whose eyes never closed, who walked the barrows long before men built halls to keep the dark at bay. They said he burned his cradle, muttered one. That he whispered to the bones beneath the stones. Fridas nodded. He was not evil. Only lost. Left behind when the gods drew the veil. But he remembered the old sleep. And he gave me this, to guide another. She turned to the boy. The stone in her hand pulsed faster now, matching the rhythm beneath Ingvar's skin. The shadow beneath him shifted again, reaching, curling, waiting. He does not need to wake, she said. He needs to return. Return where? The mother asked. To before, Fridas said. Before noise. Before name. Where sleep is pure. She pressed the stone to the boy's chest. The room dimmed. The flame in the hearth sputtered, turned blue, then vanished. All sound fell away. And then they saw it. Just behind the boy's cot, against the far wall, where shadow clung thickest, a door appeared. Not made of wood or metal, but of smoke and memory, arched and breathing. It pulsed once, then opened inward. For a moment, all was still. Then Ingvar sat up. He looked not at them, but at the door. And he smiled. He stood, and walked toward it, barefoot, eyes full of peace. As he passed through, the shadow beneath him vanished. The door closed. And was gone. Only the stone remained, cracked and silent. Fridas turned to the mother, who knelt, face buried in her hands. He's not lost, she said softly. He's finally home. Outside, snow began to fall again, not harsh, not sharp. Gentle. Clean. The boy was gone. But the dream was whole. Fog rose from the earth as though the ground itself exhaled. It drifted between the longhouses in thin, curling strands, clinging to the wooden beams like old spiderwebs and seeping through the chinks in the walls with a slow, sentient persistence. Eldervac was still. Too still. Even the crows had ceased their vigil from the treetops, and the dogs no longer barked at the dark. The air tasted different now, thicker, sour with the scent of burning lichen and damp fur, tinged with the coppery undertone of blood. The villagers moved quietly, shadows of themselves, their voices hushed to murmurs, their eyes red-rimmed from dreams they could no longer remember. Dreams that fled upon waking, but left their mark in the ache of bone and the echo of a cry that never reached the throat. On the 14th night, as the aurora twisted like a serpent overhead, the sleepwalkers returned. It began with a boy. Barefoot, shirtless, hair soaked with sweat though the wind bit like knives. He stepped from his family's hall at the first light of moonrise, eyes wide and pale, unseeing. His mother called to him, softly at first, then louder, but he did not turn. He moved toward the woods beyond the barrow fields, one foot in front of the other, slow and certain, as though pulled by an invisible cord. She tried to stop him. Her hand reached out and caught his wrist, but his flesh burned like coal, and she cried out, staggering back into the snow. He walked on. By dawn, 5 more had followed. By dusk, a dozen. None could be roused, no matter how loud the voice or how firm the grip. They walked in silence, their breaths shallow, their faces blank as river stone. They did not answer to name or prayer. When the watchers tried to bar their path with stone or blade, the sleepwalkers moved around them, not with anger or awareness, but inevitability. As though the body were a shadow cast by something dreaming far below the roots of the world. Fridas watched them from the ridge above the village, her cloak drawn tight, her bare feet buried in frost. She did not follow. Not yet. But the rune burned hot beneath her skin, and the air around her trembled with voices only she could hear. They spoke not in words, but in feelings, grief, old and unburied, longing, bottomless and bright, the quiet terror of waking in the dark with no name. The seeress had said nothing since the hollow earth had opened. She had vanished with the last raven, into a mist that did not lift. No one had seen her hut smoke again. No one dared climb the mountain. The sleepwalkers made their way toward the sea, not the fjord, but the strand beyond the cliffs, where the tides pulled hardest and the winds did not speak the tongue of men. It was a place of salt and whispering sand, where the bones of whales lay half buried and seaweed coiled like rope around blackened rocks. No one from Eldervac went there any more. It had been forbidden since the last storm brought shipwreck, when the drowned crew washed ashore with eyes glassy and mouths full of silt. But the sleepwalkers walked there now, barefoot, eyes open, hearts quiet. Ira, leaning heavily on her staff, found Fridas at the ridge's edge. "They are not possessed," Fridas said before the elder could speak. "They are summoned." "By what?" "Not by a god," she answered. "By memory." Ira frowned. "The dead?" "No," Fridas said, her eyes darkening as she looked toward the gray horizon. "By what the dead remember." They descended together. By the time they reached the strand, the sleepwalkers had formed a circle in the sand, standing still as carved figures, their breath misting the air in unison. In the center of the circle lay a single shape, curled, fetal, motionless. It was a girl, no more than 10, her hair pale, her skin ash-white, her lips tinged blue. She was not from the village. None recognized her. Yet her presence was undeniable, like a forgotten name whispered too many times to ignore. Fridas stepped into the circle. As her foot touched the sand, the sleepwalkers turned their heads, not fully, not together, but enough. They looked at her. Their eyes did not plead. They did not accuse. They only watched, as if waiting for her to speak a truth already known. Then, "She's the dream of the sea." The sleepwalkers sat down as one, forming a ring around the girl. Their eyes closed. Their breath deepened. The wind stilled. And then the girl opened her eyes. They were not human. They were dark and vast, reflecting not the sky, but something beneath it, shapes that moved with slow elegance, currents that spoke in silence, songs without words. She looked at Fridas, and Fridas saw herself reflected not as she was, but as she had been, and as she would be, a thread in a tapestry woven from salt and shadow. The girl spoke. "Your sleep is broken." Fridas nodded. "We know." The girl blinked once. "Then you must return the name." Leaf stepped forward. "What name?" The girl looked to him, and the air around him thickened like the moment before lightning. "The one you buried in fire." Fridas closed her eyes. She saw it again, the 9th rune. The way it twisted. The way it burned. The way it erased. "I still carry its ash," she said. "Then carry it no longer," the girl replied. "Bury it in stillness." With trembling hands, Fridas drew the small pouch from her cloak. She walked to the edge of the tide, where the sea foam hissed like breath, and poured the ash into the surf. The waves stilled. For one breath. Then the tide retreated, far, far beyond the shore, revealing black stone, glistening kelp, ancient carvings that no hand had made. The ocean itself sighed, long and deep. The sleepwalkers slumped to the ground, breathing slow, peaceful. The girl closed her eyes. And vanished. Only the memory of her remained. And in Eldervac, sleep returned, not haunted, not hunted. Only quiet. The storm came with no warning. No cloud heralded its birth, no shift in the winds carried its scent. It descended in silence, as though the sky itself had decided, all at once, to forget light. Snow fell first, soft, fine, endless, blinding not with volume but with weightless persistence, veiling the village of Eldervac in white as thin as ash. Then came the cold. Not the cold of winter or wind, but a deeper, older cold that bit into the marrow and turned thought to frost. Doors swelled shut. Fires died in their hearths despite fresh fuel. Breath turned to glass in the air. Even the trees seemed to shrink back into the earth, their limbs curled and brittle beneath the weight of something not yet named. Inside the longhouse of Halderstoneborn, the warmth held longest. The fire was fed with elder pine, bones of driftwood, and a thin strip of blackroot hung in the smoke to scent the air with sleep. Yet even here, something was wrong. Fridas stirred restlessly, twisting in her bed of furs, her breath uneven, her skin slick with sweat despite the chill. Her brow was furrowed in a way the villagers had not seen since her return from beneath the hollow earth. The rune that had once pulsed at her neck was gone, but its echo lingered in her flesh, glowing faintly when the light of the fire flickered low. Beside her, Halder kept vigil, eyes red-rimmed, fingers tight around his carved ashwood staff. He had not slept in 2 nights. Then Freydis screamed. It was not a child's scream. It was the scream of stone breaking. Of a world cracking open. Of something buried too long forcing its way back into breath. Halder lunged forward, catching her shoulders as she arched backward, eyes wide and blind, mouth frozen in a perfect circle of terror. Her voice choked off as suddenly as it had come, and she went still, limp, too limp, as if she had been emptied. When her eyes opened again, they were not her own. "They have come," she said, and her voice was not her voice. "The waking curse rides the wind." Halder froze. He knew the name. Everyone did. It was a tale told in whispers, when the fire burned low and the snow curled tight around the walls. Of a sickness of sleep not born of fever, but of forgetting. A curse that walked like a man, spoke like a woman, and left whole villages standing, silent and unmoving, their inhabitants trapped between dream and daylight, eyes open, mouth still, unable to scream. Kara arrived moments later, dragging open the door with a cry. Snow poured in behind her, clinging to her cloak like moths. "The wind has changed," she said, voice breathless. "Something walks the ridge." Ira was already outside. The old woman moved like a shadow across the snow, her staff trailing a spiral behind her as she traced the path toward the watcher's post. There Leaf stood trembling, eyes locked on the trees at the village's edge. He did not speak. His mouth opened and closed, soundless. His hand pointed. Through the snow, a figure approached. It did not walk so much as glide, its shape wrapped in layers of fabric that moved independent of the wind. It was tall. Too tall. And thin, as if made of smoke packed into skin. Its face was a mask, white, round, smooth as eggshell, with no mouth and no eyes. Only a spiral carved into the forehead, deep and black. Where it stepped, the snow melted. Not with heat, but with memory. Footprints did not linger. They vanished, as though the ground itself denied having been touched. Ira drew a line in the snow with her staff, an old ward, a glyph of rest, of silence. The figure stopped. Then it raised its hand. From every longhouse in the village came a sound, a sigh. Not of relief. Not of peace. But of surrender. The sleepers stirred. They rose from their beds one by one. Eyes open. Hearts beating. But something was gone. A glaze coated their gaze. Their steps were slow, uncertain. Their hands hung limp at their sides. They moved not as people, but as echoes. Kara ran to intercept them, calling names, her brother, her cousin, her eldest son. They did not hear her. Or they did, and chose not to answer. Inside the longhouse, Freydis wept without tears. "He is waking them," she whispered. "Not to life. To silence. The waking curse," Halder said again, the name now a weight in his mouth. Freydis sat up, her breath uneven. "He was once a dreamer. Long ago. Before the gods. He dreamed too far. Saw too much. Lost his name. Now he walks, unmade, gathering others to his quiet. Not death. Not sleep. Just empty." Leaf stepped forward, hands shaking. "How do we stop something that does not live?" Freydis looked to him, her face pale. "We do not stop him. We remember." She rose, trembling, and walked outside. The snow welcomed her, melting beneath her steps, revealing the black soil of Eldervac beneath. The waking curse turned toward her, mask tilting. It said nothing. But the air around it buzzed with forgetting. Freydis raised her voice. Not a scream. Not a chant. A lullaby. Soft. Old. Broken in places. The one her mother had sung in the before times, when frost clung to the beams and wolves howled at the door. She sang not with strength, but with memory. The sleepers paused. Some blinked. The waking curse hesitated. Freydis took a step forward. Then another. Her voice wavered, then steadied. Behind her, others joined. First Ira. Then Leaf. Then Kara, her voice cracked but strong. A song. Carried in breath. Passed like flame from one heart to another. The waking curse recoiled. Its mask cracked. And from the spiral on its brow, a wail erupted, a soundless howl of rage and loss, of a dream that had lost its way. The figure began to unravel, its form peeling into smoke, into mist, into nothing. The snow fell again, slow and soft. The sleepers blinked again. And wept. Friedis collapsed into Halda's arms. He will return, she whispered, eyes already closing. When we forget again. Halda held her close, and for the first time in many winters, the village slept in silence. And dreamed without fear. Darkness lay heavy over Eldervac, not as a curse but as a shroud, a deep, velvet stillness that settled upon the village like a benediction. The snow no longer fell. The wind no longer prowled. The stars above burned with steady, unflickering resolve, watching from their high seats as if bearing witness to something sacred. The nightmares had fled. The wolves had grown silent. The waking curse was gone. Yet none among the people stirred with celebration. There were no feasts, no laughter, no shouts of victory. Instead, there was reverence. A silence held not in fear, but in recognition of something ancient having passed through them, leaving the threads of their world slightly frayed. That night, they prepared the twilight offerings. It was an old rite, spoken of only by the seeress and the hearth grandmothers in the long years before the longhouses were raised in stone. It was said that when the veil between breath and dream grew too thin, and when those beyond it reached through in hunger or sorrow, the living must offer light not to the gods, but to the forgotten. Not prayers, not names, but warmth, small flames lit at the threshold of night, set adrift upon water, smoke, and wind. A sign to the sleepers that they were remembered. A promise to the dead that their silence still mattered. Ira led the gathering with a hand that trembled not from age, but from weight. Her staff struck the stone at the center of the village square 3 times, slow and sure, each blow ringing out across the snow in perfect rhythm. One by one, the villagers emerged from their homes, wrapped in furs and solemn purpose. Each bore something in hand, a candle carved from tallow and herbs, bound with a single thread of hair from a loved one. Atop each wick sat a fragment of sleep stone, a rare mineral harvested only during frostless nights beneath the northern ridge, said to remember dreams long after they faded from the mind. The fires in the longhouses were allowed to die. The hearths were swept clean, ashes buried in the snow beside the roots of the ancient tree that stood in the village's heart. Friedis stood beneath it, her eyes closed, her breath even. She had not spoken since the waking curse unraveled into the mist. She wore a cloak of dark blue wool and her hair was braided with thin threads of silver, gifts from the seeress long ago. In her hand, she held no offering, only silence. Leaf approached her gently, his own candle flickering softly in the cold. "You must release it," he said, his voice low, careful. "The last of it still clings to you." She opened her eyes. "There is no last of it," she said. "Only what waits." He did not argue. He only stood with her, shoulder to shoulder, as the villagers formed a great circle around the tree. Snow creaked beneath their feet. Above them, the aurora whispered. Then the chant began. No words. No melody. Only breath, in and out, paced and shared. A rhythm older than speech, older than gods. The kind passed from mother to child before language gave form to sorrow. With each breath, the candles were lit, one by one, moving sunwise around the circle until every flame danced softly in the dark, casting golden halos upon furred hoods and weathered cheeks. When the last candle was lit, the procession began. Ira walked first, slow and steady, guiding them through the village, past the sleeping wells, the barrowstones, the empty hall where the seeress once lived. Each home was given a flame, left at the lintel or upon a flat stone in the snow. No names were spoken. Only gestures. The placing of hands upon doorposts. The touching of snow to brow and breast. The fire did the remembering. They walked until the edge of the fjord met their feet. There, at the black rim where ice and water breathed together in uneasy rhythm, they paused. Small wooden bowls, carved with care in the days following the hollow earth's song, were placed upon the surface of the water. The candles were nestled into them. With a whisper, each was set adrift. Some floated slow, curving along the current. Others moved swiftly, pulled by hidden tides. But none were overturned. The flames held. Freydis stepped forward last. She did not carry a candle. She carried a small stone, rough, uncut, the color of old shadow. Upon it, barely visible, was etched a single rune, the symbol for stillness. Not silence. Not sleep. Stillness. She knelt and placed it at the edge of the ice, where the last of the tide lapped at her feet. "This is for the name I did not speak," she said, her voice barely a thread. She let it go. The stone sank. And the aurora above flared, one last time, into a brilliant ribbon of fire. Behind her, Kara lifted her voice, not with a hymn, but with a lullaby. The same she once sang to her brother in their childhood. Others joined. The melody was jagged, imperfect, too many keys and too many cracks, but it was real. It was human. It was alive. The fjord listened. And then the flames drifted beyond the reach of sight. One by one, the villagers turned and made their way back. The snow had softened. The wind had stilled. Freydis remained a while longer at the shore. She did not cry. She did not pray. She only watched the last of the light disappear into the horizon, and whispered, "Dream gently." Then she, too, turned. And Eldervac slept. Not from weariness, but from peace. The night of no fire arrived without omen. No crow cried, no wind shifted. The stars remained fixed in their icy thrones, the sky clear as glass, brittle and deep. And yet something had changed in the bones of the world, something subtle and immediate, a tightening of the breath, a hesitation in the pulse. The people of Eldervac awoke to find every flame extinguished. Hearths that had burned for generations, whose embers had never gone cold, were dead. No smoke curled from the chimneys. No warmth rose from beneath the stones. Even the torches, newly soaked in oil and wrapped in clean cloth, would not catch. Sparks danced from flint but vanished into the air, swallowed by a stillness that did not belong. The air was not colder, and yet every breath seemed hollow, incomplete, as though missing the memory of fire. They gathered in the central hall by instinct. No summons had been called, no horn blown, but one by one, each soul crept from their longhouse, cloaked in furs, eyes wide and fearful. It was unnatural, this absence, not the failing of fire, but its refusal. Children clung to their mothers. Elders clutched tokens of the old gods. Leaf knelt near the hearthstone, attempting once more to strike light, but the flint rang uselessly against the iron, a spark with no destiny. Halder stood by the entrance, his breath curling in silver ribbons, watching the sky with a soldier's suspicion. Freydis came last. She stepped into the silence like one returning to a dream she had never truly left. Her cloak was woven with raven feathers, and a braid of bone hung from her belt. No light marked her path, yet all saw her clearly, for the dark itself parted to let her pass. She knelt by the hearth, where ashes sat gray and dry, as if untouched by flame for weeks. Her hand hovered over them. "This is no weather," she said. "It is not death either," Kara whispered. "No," Freydis answered. "It is waiting." Ira stepped forward, leaning heavily on her staff, her face drawn tight with memory. "I have seen this once before. When I was a child, before Eldervac was made stone. We lived in timber then, and the snows buried our roofs. One winter night the fire died. Not from wind, not from rain. It simply turned away. My grandmother called it the veiling." "The veiling," repeated Halder, voice low. "Of what?" "The Flame Mother," Ira replied. "The guardian of the warmth between worlds. The keeper of sleep's border. When she hides her face, the world forgets to breathe." Leaf turned, confused. "Is she a god?" Ira shook her head. "Worse. She is a memory too powerful to become myth. A truth left unspoken so that lesser gods could be believed. The villagers looked between them, murmuring. Whispers of old tales. Of spirits made of embers. Of women who walked through blizzards with fire in their palms and melted ice where their footsteps passed. Of sleeping stones that burned with forgotten names. Why now? Someone asked. Why would she veil herself now? Friedis rose slowly. Because we lit the offerings. Because we buried the curse. Because the dreamer beneath the hollow earth sleeps again. All things that drift must one day return. All things that burn must one day fade. She does not come in anger. She comes in silence, to remind us that warmth is not ours. The villagers began to stir uneasy. A cold without wind was not natural. A night without flame was not survivable. Already frost formed on the lintels, and their breath fogged heavy. Babies whimpered in their mothers' arms. A low panic hummed beneath the stillness, like a string pulled taut. Then came the knocking. It echoed once, loud and deliberate, upon the outer wall of the hall. Not a fist. Not claws. But a single, slow strike, wood on wood. Then again. Then silence. No one moved. Then the third knock fell, and the doors shuddered inward slightly, as if pushed by windless breath. Friedis walked to them. Halder blocked her path, his axe in hand. You don't open to a ghost, he said. She is no ghost, Friedis replied. And she is already inside. She reached past him, laying her palm against the wood. It was warm. Not with fire, but with the memory of fire, something that pulsed beneath the surface like an old heart. She does not want entry, Friedis said. She wants reverence. The villagers knelt. One by one, they dropped to their knees, heads bowed, not in worship, but in recognition. Of fear. Of history. Of cold older than bones and older than names. Friedis opened the door. A woman stood beyond it. Tall, cloaked in robes of smoke and silk, her hair long and red as coals banked beneath ash. Her eyes were ember pits, and her skin shimmered faintly like heat over a forge. She said nothing. She carried no torch. But the snow melted beneath her feet, and where she passed, frost turned to steam. She entered the hall, and all lowered their heads further. She walked to the dead hearth and knelt. She breathed once. And flame leapt into being. Not wild, not roaring, but still. Tall. White. Pure. The fire crackled once, then stilled. It did not dance. It did not consume. It simply existed. The woman turned to Friedis. You have remembered, she said. Her voice was not sound, but sensation, warmth on skin, the ache in frozen fingers after a hearth is found. So I return. Friedis bowed her head. Forgive us. There is nothing to forgive, the flame mother whispered. Only to carry. You must carry it. She held out her hand. In it, a coal the size of a sparrow's egg, glowing faintly, wrapped in silver ash. For when the fire forgets you again, she said. And it will. Friedis took it. It burned, but did not wound. The woman turned. And vanished. Not with a flash. With a sigh. The fire in the hearth continued to burn. The villagers slowly rose. They gathered around it, hands outstretched, not to warm, but to remember. Outside, the sky brightened faintly. The night of no fire had passed. And Eldervac, warmed by memory, endured. The morning after the fire returned was unlike any Eldervac had known. The sky above was not blue but veiled in shifting gray, like the hide of a beast stirring in its sleep. Light came not from the sun, which did not rise, but from the air itself, faintly luminous, pale and constant, casting long shadows even where no object stood. The wind, for the first time in weeks, was absent. The silence stretched so long and thin it felt hollow, and though the village moved again, fires kindled, water drawn, doors unbarred, there was no joy in the movement, only endurance. No one laughed. No one sang. They had faced silence, and silence had answered with fire. But deep beneath their waking hours, something else had begun to hum, a vibration felt in the soles of their feet, in their teeth, in the depths of their sleep. The world was breathing differently. Fridas woke with a gasp. She sat upright in her cot, the coal of the flame mother still wrapped in linen at her throat, its warmth steady and silent. Her skin glistened with cold sweat. Her breath came ragged, though no nightmare chased it. She had not dreamed. That was the terror of it, she had felt nothing. As if someone had drawn a curtain across her soul and left her floating in a room without walls. No thoughts. No visions. Just an absence that pressed inward like a hand made of mist. She stood, legs trembling beneath her, and stepped outside. The snow had begun to melt in strange shapes, not puddles, but spirals etched in frost, perfect and equidistant, coiled like the ancient glyphs that adorn the old bones buried deep beneath the barrows. They shimmered faintly. Each one pulsed with a rhythm she could not hear but felt in her blood. And beyond them, far at the edge of sight, the sky itself was changing. Not breaking. Opening. It began as a fracture, a hairline seam running across the northern sky, fine and bright. From within it bled not light, but shadow, deep, thick, and slow, like ink spilled in water. The villagers gathered without being called, drawn by the sense of something returning, something not wholly real. They stood together, wrapped in silence and fur, eyes turned skyward. And as they watched, the sky cracked wider, revealing nothing. Not stars. Not black. Just depth, endless, churning, breathing depth. Halda stepped forward, hand on his staff, face grim. The Janunga Gap, he said. The word was a whisper on every tongue before he had finished speaking. The yawning void. The space before creation. Before fire. Before frost. Before gods. The old gap, Leaf murmured. Why now? Because we've stirred it, said Ira, who stood behind them, her back hunched, her voice brittle as frozen reeds. We walked too far into memory. We touched the roots of the dream. And now it yawns to see who walks its edge. The sky pulsed. And from the fracture something emerged. It was not a shape, not in the way one sees with eyes. It was more a presence, a suggestion of enormity. Light bent around it. The air grew thick. The birds overhead turned as one and fled south, not cawing but silent, as though even sound refused to follow. The snow beneath the villagers' feet hardened into ice. Time seemed to slow, or perhaps coil, because when Fridas reached for Halda's arm, her fingers trailed behind like smoke. It's watching us, Kara said. But it has no eyes. It doesn't need them, Fridas whispered. It remembers what we were before we were. The villagers dropped to their knees. Not from worship. From instinct. And still the void widened. Fridas felt the coal at her neck begin to pulse, quickening against her breast, heat spreading through her limbs. The warmth didn't comfort, it warned. The flame mother had not spoken of the gap. Had not prepared her for this. But still, she had given her the ember. Not for light. For choice. We have to answer, Fridas said, rising to her feet. To what? Asked Leaf, clutching a blade too old to be useful. To the question it does not ask. She stepped toward the edge of the spiral patterns, where the air vibrated and the snow turned silver. The gap responded. The ground shuddered. The village longhouses groaned. And from deep within the sky, a sound began. Not a roar. Not a scream. A tone. Low. Constant. Resounding. It passed through bone and blood and thought, leaving no pain, only awareness. It was the sound of before. Of the not yet. Of the space between breath and meaning. It was the name of the void. And now, it called for theirs. Fridas stood alone in the center of the spirals, arms outstretched, the ember burning through her skin. I give it mine, she said. The villagers gasped. Ira cried out. Halda tried to step forward but found his limbs frozen. Fridas smiled softly, peacefully, as her voice lifted with the tone. I give you the name we all carry. She reached into her cloak and drew forth the coal. It blazed. Not orange. Not red. White. Pure. And then she flung it upward, into the fracture above. The coal vanished. The tones ceased. And the gap began to close. The shadow recoiled, drawn inward like breath returning to lungs. The light dimmed. The spirals in the snow melted. And then the sky returned, whole, cold, and endless. Fridas fell. They rushed to her side. Halda lifted her gently, his voice cracking as he called her name. She was breathing. But her eyes were closed. Her hands were burned. And upon her forehead, faint and fading, was the spiral mark. They carried her back in silence. No one slept that night. But they dreamed. For the first time in generations, every soul in Eldervac shared a single dream. Of fire. Of darkness. Of the gap that waited not in hunger, but in memory. And of the girl who gave it a name. The thaw did not come with warmth but with memory. Snow still clung to the eaves of Eldervac's longhouses, and the fjord remained sealed in its black shell of ice, but something in the marrow of the world had softened. The wind no longer bit, it whispered. The trees no longer stood in rigid stillness, they leaned as if listening. In the skies above, the aurora faded to a ghost of color, like smoke from a dying fire. Beneath that pallid sky, the villagers moved differently. They walked without haste, spoke in low tones, and looked to the east more often, where the sea met the sky and the ridges of the world curved like the edge of an old bow. The girl who bore the name of Fire now lay silent, and her silence echoed through every soul. Fridas had not stirred in 3 days. Yet none said she slept. She was not sleeping. She was gone, but not taken. She was elsewhere. Within the healer's hall, her breath came steady, if shallow. A white cloth rested over her brow, darkened where the mark had once burned, the spiral now faded, a shadow that glowed only in moonlight. Around her, the watchers kept their vigil, Halda with his hands folded and unmoving, Kara seated with her knees to her chest and her eyes rimmed with salt, leaf-carving runes into driftwood not to read but to feel their shapes again. Ira sat in the corner with her eyes closed, not resting but remembering. Outside, the village did not sleep. None had since the sky opened. On the 4th dawn, before even the ravens had returned, the mist shifted. They rolled in from the sea in long fingers, pale and damp, curling through the trees like lost smoke. And with them came a sound, soft, distant, steady. Not the lullaby of waves or the rustle of wind, but a cadence. Footsteps. It began as a rumor that someone was walking across the ice of the fjord, from the far end where no boat dared launch, no beast dared tread. A shape had emerged, they said. Tall, slender, wrapped in white. Some whispered it was a spirit. Others said it was the seeress returned. Halda stood and moved to the threshold, and when he saw the figure through the veil of frost, his breath caught. It was neither spirit nor crone. It was a woman, young and old, and beyond either. She walked barefoot across the ice, her steps leaving no prints, her hair trailing behind her like snowmelt. In her hand she held a staff, twisted and white, carved from driftwood and bone. And her eyes were like the moon beneath water, bright, but distant. The villagers gathered before the longhouse as she reached the edge of the village. She did not speak. She only raised her hand, and the fire pits flared, not with flame, but with steam. The ice did not melt. The snow did not part. But every breath grew warmer, and every chest lightened. She passed through them without sound or word, moving toward the hall where Fridas lay. None stopped her. Inside, she stood over the girl and reached down with long fingers, placing them gently over the spiral mark. The coal that Fridas had once carried, the last breath of the flame mother, glowed from beneath the girl's skin, as if called to light again. The stranger closed her eyes, and the breath in the room thickened, filled with a scent of salt and moss and something sweeter, like the memory of mead long since drunk. Then Fridas inhaled. Long, slow. Her eyes fluttered open. The woman withdrew her hand and stepped back. Fridas sat up. No one spoke. Then, at last, Fridas whispered, "She came." Hulda stepped forward. "Who?" Fridas looked toward the woman. "The Snow Maiden." The name spread like fire through dry pine. They had heard it in stories only half told, the kind spoken near the end of a long night when tongues grew loose and reason wandered. A goddess of winter, yes, but not of ice or death. A guardian of the pause between seasons, of the space between one breath and the next. A daughter of silence and time, who came only when the world turned too far and needed guiding back. The Snow Maiden turned to the crowd gathered outside the hall. Her voice came like wind through birch leaves, low, musical, unearthly. "You have remembered too much," she said. "And so the old songs stir. But memory must be balanced by forgetting. Fire must be balanced by frost. Dreams must sleep again." Kara stepped forward, her fists clenched. "And what of the girl?" The Snow Maiden looked to Fridas. "She has carried both fire and silence. She has opened the gate, and she has closed it. But she is not done." Fridas stood shakily but tall. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sure. "What more must I do?" The Snow Maiden approached and placed a kiss upon Fridas's brow, just above the fading spiral. "You must walk the ridge," the villagers murmured. Leaf asked, "What lies there?" The Snow Maiden's smile did not reach her eyes. "The last dream. The first sleep. The place where Yggdrasil kisses the sky and the frost touches the root of flame. It is the high place, the final crossing. And only she can walk it." Fridas nodded. There was no protest. No delay. No questions. Before the sun could rise, if it ever would, she took her cloak, the staff left by the Snow Maiden, and set off toward the ridge. No one followed. They watched as she ascended the slope beyond the fjord, where the trees grew thin and the stones bore the weight of stars. Mist clung to her feet. Her braid fluttered like a banner. And the wind, for the first time in memory, sang. When she disappeared over the ridge's crown, a calm fell upon Eldervac. No birds returned. No dreams came that night. But none feared the stillness. They had given their daughter to the height. And the world turned quietly beneath her feet. The ridge rose like a sleeping spine against the pale sky, its slopes etched with wind-carved runes and scattered bones too old for naming. Snow clung in patches, but most had melted beneath the strange heat of starlight. Those stars now hung low and unmoving, as though reluctant to turn their gaze from the girl ascending into the hush. Fridas moved without haste, her feet bare against the stone, the staff of driftwood and bones steady in her hand. She felt no pain, no cold. Only stillness. Not the stillness of death or the emptiness of forgetting, but a vast, living quiet, like standing in the moment before the world breathes in. Around her, the wind had stilled. No bird flew overhead. No creature stirred in the sparse brush. Even time seemed to pause, waiting for her to cross. At the summit, where the land fell away in all directions and the sky pressed close like a bowl, she stopped. Before her rose a stone unlike any she had seen, a monolith of black ice and iron, rooted in the earth as though it had grown from the bones of the world. It bore no inscription, yet its surface shimmered faintly with hidden marks, runes that pulsed beneath like the veins of a sleeping thing. The wind did not blow here. The stars cast no shadow. This was the highest place, the crown of the earth, where no god ruled and no man remembered. Here, the boundary between flame and frost dissolved. Here, the last dream waited. She knelt before the monolith, and the staff fell from her hands with a soft clatter. Her breath clouded once, then ceased to steam. The silence deepened. Beneath her knees, the stone vibrated gently, as though breathing with her or for her. She lowered her head, placing her palms against the frozen rock, and closed her eyes. At first, there was only dark. Not the blind dark of night, but the endless dark of before light, before sleep, before even the dreaming. Then came the sound, low and slow, the groan of trees beneath snow, the moan of ice shifting far below ground. It rose in her bones, then in her blood, then in her heart. It was the sound of the world remembering itself. And then, the dream began. She stood in a forest made of echoes. The trees had no leaves, only memories of leaves, flickering in and out of being with every step. The ground was soft, not with moss or snow, but with forgotten thoughts, old hopes, old fears, long buried and long left behind. Above her, the sky shimmered with colors she had no name for. Beneath her feet, faces whispered up from the loam, ancestors, beasts, gods, and things beyond all. They sang in silence. They told her stories without tongue. And in the center of the forest stood a tree. It was not Yggdrasil, though it bore its shape. It was older, rawer, less carved by meaning. Its roots stretched down into the void. Its branches reached not up, but outward, touching all things at once. At its base, a flame flickered, a single coal, resting in a bowl of still water. She approached and knelt. From behind the tree, something stepped forward. It was her. But not her. An older self. A younger self. A self untouched by time. Her eyes were stars. Her hair was mist. Her mouth bore no smile, but held peace. This self reached forward and placed a hand on Freydis's chest. The spiral burned again. She gasped. Then the self spoke, not aloud, but within. You are the bearer of balance. Not the keeper of fire, nor the servant of shadow. You are the breath between. The step between. What must I do? Freydis asked. End it. What? The dreaming. The silence. The old songs. All must end, or none shall rest. Sleep must become sleep again, not prophecy, not path. Peace. Freydis looked down at the coal. Burn it? Bury it. She reached into the bowl, and the flame flared. It licked her fingers, but did not burn. It pulsed once, then dimmed. She placed it at the base of the tree. The roots moved gently and drew it in. The flame vanished. The tree sighed. And the dream dissolved. She awoke upon the ridge, lying upon her back, the stars wheeling above her like lanterns in slow procession. The monolith was gone. The staff was gone. But she was warm. For the first time in her life, truly warm. She sat up slowly, breast steady, heart calm.